The tremor hit without warning, a deep groan from the earth itself that sent Matthias Aldrin stumbling against the mine shaft wall as rock dust began to rain down from the ceiling above. He had been warned not to venture this deep into the copperstone mine. The foreman had made it clear that the lower tunnels were unstable, that the seams had been worked out months ago, and the structural supports were failing. But Matthias needed the work, needed the coin that came from salvaging the last bits of ore from these abandoned passages, and he had thought himself careful enough to avoid disaster. The mountain, it seemed, had other plans. The rumbling intensified, and Matthias broke into a run, his lantern swinging wildly as he raced toward the main shaft. Behind him, he heard the crack of timber giving way, the thunder of stone meeting stone. The air filled with choking dust that burned his lungs and stung his eyes. He rounded a corner and nearly collided with a figure crouched against the wall, green hands covering a head of thick black hair. An orc. A young woman, judging by her size and the feminine curve of her jaw. She looked up at him with wide amber eyes, terror written plainly across her features. Her small tusks caught the lamplight as she opened her mouth, but whatever she meant to say was lost in the roar of the collapse beginning in earnest. Matthias did not think. He grabbed her wrist and hauled her to her feet, pulling her after him as he sprinted down the tunnel. The orc woman stumbled, clearly disoriented, but she matched his pace. Behind them, the ceiling came down in a cascade of stone and shattered wood. The force of it sent a wall of air and debris rushing through the passage, lifting them both off their feet and hurling them forward. They landed hard in a tangle of limbs. Matthias felt the air driven from his lungs, tasted blood in his mouth. The orc woman had landed half on top of him, and her arms went around his torso, clinging with desperate strength as the world seemed to end around them. He wrapped his own arms over her head, trying to shield her from the worst of the falling rock. The collapse lasted an eternity, and no time at all. When the dust finally began to settle, Matthias became aware of several things at once. His lantern had somehow survived, casting a weak circle of light across rubble-strewn stone. The passage behind them was completely blocked, tons of rock sealing off the way they had come. And the orc woman was still pressed against him, her face buried in his chest, her entire body shaking. "Are you hurt?" he managed to rasp, his throat raw from dust. She did not answer immediately. Her arms remained locked around him, her breathing rapid and shallow. Matthias could feel the frantic beating of her heart against his ribs. Slowly, carefully, he brought one hand to her shoulder. "Hey," he said more gently. "Are you injured?" The orc woman lifted her head. Her amber eyes were enormous in the lamplight, and tracks through the dust on her cheeks showed where tears had fallen. She shook her head slightly, then seemed to realize she was still clinging to him. A flush darkened her green skin, but she did not immediately let go. "I thought I was going to die," she whispered. Her voice was rough, accented in the way of the mountain clans. "The ceiling started to fall, and I could not find the way out, and I thought..." Another tremor cut her off. Not as severe as the first, but enough to send a fresh rain of pebbles and dust cascading from above. The orc woman made a small, frightened sound and pressed closer to Matthias again. This time he held her without hesitation, one hand on the back of her head, the other around her shoulders. "We are all right," he said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "We made it. We are alive." They stayed like that until the tremors subsided. When the orc woman finally pulled back, Matthias got his first good look at her. She was young, probably close to his own 23 years, with strong features and small, almost delicate tusks that curved up from her lower jaw. Her dark hair was braided in a practical style, and she wore the rough clothing of a laborer: canvas trousers, a heavy shirt, boots reinforced with metal. There was ore dust under her fingernails and calluses on her palms. "You were mining?" he asked. She nodded, sitting back on her heels. "My father and I work this section. Or we did. He was in the upper galleries when the collapse started. I hope he made it out." "The collapse seemed to start in the lower levels," Matthias said. "If he was higher up, he probably had time to reach the main shaft." The orc woman closed her eyes briefly, and her lips moved in what might have been a prayer. Then she opened her eyes and looked at Matthias with an expression he could not quite read. "You saved me," she said. "You could have run past, left me there, but you pulled me with you." Matthias shrugged, uncomfortable with the intensity of her gaze. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," she said flatly. "They would not for an orc." He wanted to argue, but the words died in his throat. Because she was right, was she not? He had seen the way people looked at orcs in the frontier towns, the way they were turned away from shops and inns, the way mothers pulled their children close when orcs passed on the street. The war had ended more than a decade ago, but the hatred and fear remained, festering like an old wound that would not heal. "Well," he said finally, "I am not anyone. I am Matthias Aldrin, and I am pleased to meet you, even if the circumstances are less than ideal." The corner of her mouth twitched, almost a smile. "Grasha," she said. "Grasha of the Stonefist clan, and I owe you a life debt, Matthias Aldrin." "Let us worry about getting out of here first," Matthias said. "Then we can discuss debts." He retrieved his lantern and held it up, examining their surroundings. They were in a side passage, one of the smaller tunnels that branched off from the main shaft. The collapse had blocked the way they had come from, but the passage extended in the other direction, disappearing into darkness. Matthias tried to orient himself, mentally mapping the mine's layout. "I think this tunnel connects to the eastern gallery," he said. "If we can reach it, there should be another way to the surface." Grasha nodded. "I know the eastern gallery, but it is a long walk and the supports there are old." "If there are more tremors, then we move carefully and quickly," Matthias finished. "Do you have any water, food?" She shook her head. "I was only supposed to be down here for a few hours. I have nothing." Matthias grimaced. He had a water skin, mostly full, and some dried meat wrapped in cloth. "Enough for one person for a day, maybe less for two." "We will ration what I have," he said. "Come on. The sooner we start, the sooner we get out of this mountain." They set off down the tunnel, Matthias leading with the lantern held high. Grasha followed close behind, her hand occasionally brushing his shoulder, as if she needed the reassurance of his presence. The tunnel was narrow and low, forcing them to walk single file and occasionally duck beneath protruding beams. The air was stale and thick with dust, and every sound seemed amplified in the enclosed space. As they walked, Matthias found himself acutely aware of the orc woman at his back. He had never spent time with an orc before, had never exchanged more than a few curt words with the handful he had encountered in his travels. He realized he had expected something different, though he could not have said what. Grasha seemed perfectly ordinary, if deeply shaken by their near-death experience. She breathed and walked and occasionally coughed on the dust, just as he did. "How long have you been working in the mine?" he asked, partly to break the oppressive silence, partly out of genuine curiosity. 3 months, Grasha said. "My father and I came down from the High Peak territories. There is no work there anymore, not for orcs. Too many clan feuds, too much raiding. We wanted a quieter life, so we came south to the human lands. And how has that been for you?" Matthias asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Grasha was silent for a moment. "The foreman hired us because we work hard and ask for lower wages than human miners. But the other workers hate us. They will not share their food or their fire." They trip us in the tunnels and blame us when tools go missing. My father says to endure it, that it is better than starving. I am not so sure. Matthias felt a pang of something he could not quite name. Shame, perhaps, for the cruelty of his fellow humans, or anger at the injustice of it. I am sorry, he said quietly. You deserve better. Do I? Grasha said, and there was a bitter edge to her voice. My people killed many humans during the war, burned villages, murdered families. I was only a child then, but I remember. I remember the stories the warriors told when they came back from raids. Perhaps this is what we deserve. Perhaps this is justice. You were a child, Matthias said firmly. And even if you were not, you are not responsible for what others of your kind did. Each person should be judged by their own actions, not the actions of their ancestors. Grasha made a soft sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. That is a beautiful thought, Matthias Aldrin, but it is not the world we live in. They fell silent again, and Matthias could not think of anything to say that would not sound hollow or naive. Instead, he focused on navigating the tunnel, watching for signs of instability in the walls and ceiling. They passed intersections and side passages, each one a potential wrong turn that could lead them deeper into the mountain instead of out. Matthias chose based on instinct and the faint movement of air that might indicate an opening to the surface. After what felt like hours but was probably only one, they stopped to rest. Matthias passed the water skin to Grasha, who took a small sip and handed it back. He did the same, then offered her a strip of dried meat. She hesitated before taking it. Your rations will not last long if you share them with me, she said. They will not last long regardless, Matthias replied. We might as well keep our strength up. Grasha accepted the meat and chewed slowly, making it last. In the lamplight, with the dust settling on her skin and hair, she looked exhausted. Matthias suspected he looked no better. Tell me about yourself, Grasha said after a while. What brings a human to the deep tunnels of a failing mine? Matthias leaned back against the tunnel wall. Desperation, mostly. I am a veteran discharged after the war ended. I have been drifting from place to place, taking whatever work I can find. The mine was hiring and I needed the coin. You fought in the war, Grasha said, and her tone was carefully neutral. I did, Matthias admitted. On the northern front. I was a scout, mostly. I saw orcs, fought a few, but I never, he paused, searching for the right words. I never hated your people. I was a soldier following orders and I did what I had to do to survive, but I never enjoyed it. Grasha studied him in the lamplight, her amber eyes searching his face for something. My father fought in the war too, she said. For the clans. He does not speak of it, but I know it still haunts him. He wakes sometimes in the night, calling out names I do not recognize. War leaves scars, Matthias said quietly. On everyone. They sat in companionable silence for a while longer, then Matthias pushed himself to his feet. We should keep moving. The longer we stay down here, the more likely we run into trouble. Grasha nodded and stood as well. As they started walking again, Matthias noticed that she stayed even closer than before, near enough that he could hear her breathing, feel the warmth of her presence at his back. It should have made him uncomfortable, this proximity to someone he barely knew, but instead he found it oddly reassuring. They were in this together, two people who by all rights should have been enemies, but who now depended on each other for survival. The tunnel began to slope upward, which Matthias took as a good sign. They passed more intersections, more side passages, and he chose each turn based on the upward grade and the movement of air. His lantern was burning low, the oil reservoir nearly empty. If it went out before they found the eastern gallery, they would be trapped in absolute darkness. Just as he was beginning to worry in earnest, the tunnel opened into a larger space. Matthias held up the lantern and felt relief flood through him. They had reached the eastern gallery, a wide chamber with multiple passages branching off in different directions. More importantly, he could see the timber framework of the main support structure, which meant they were close to the primary shaft. "This way," he said, heading toward the largest of the passages. "This should take us to the main shaft, and from there we can reach the surface." But as they entered the passage, the ground beneath them trembled again. Not a major quake, but enough to make Matthias freeze in place, his heart pounding. Dust sifted down from the ceiling, and somewhere in the distance, he heard the ominous crack of failing timber. Grasha grabbed his arm, her grip tight enough to bruise. "We need to hurry," she said, and there was fear in her voice that matched his own. They ran. The passage was wide enough for them to move side by side, and Grasha kept pace with him easily, her longer legs eating up the distance. The tremors continued, growing in intensity, and the sounds of collapse echoed through the tunnels around them. Matthias could see the main shaft ahead, the broad opening that led to the surface, and he pushed himself to run faster. They burst into the main shaft, just as a section of the ceiling caved in behind them. The passage they had just exited was sealed in an instant, buried under tons of rock. Grasha stumbled and nearly fell, but Matthias caught her arm and hauled her toward the rope lift that would carry them to the surface. The lift was a simple platform suspended by thick ropes, operated by a hand crank. Matthias shoved Grasha onto it and jumped on after her, then began cranking with all his strength. The platform lurched upward, swaying dangerously, but it held. Below them, more sections of the mine collapsed, the destruction spreading like a wave. Grasha joined him at the crank, adding her strength to his, and together they hauled the platform up the shaft. Matthias's arms burned with the effort, his lungs screaming for air, but he did not stop. He could not stop. The mine was coming down around them, and if they did not reach the surface in the next few minutes, they never would. Light appeared above them, the pale gray of early evening. Matthias had lost all sense of time in the tunnels, but judging by the light, they had been underground for most of the day. A few more turns of the crank, a few more feet, and then they were at the top, scrambling off the platform onto solid ground. They collapsed a safe distance from the mine entrance, gasping for breath. Around them, other miners and workers stood in shocked clusters, staring at the devastation. The entire mountain seemed to shudder, and then, with a sound like the end of the world, the main shaft collapsed. The entrance crumbled inward, sealing the mine forever. Matthias lay on his back, staring up at the sky, and felt a hysterical laugh building in his chest. They had made it. Against all odds, they had survived. Beside him, Grasha was shaking again, but this time it was with relief rather than fear. She turned her head to look at him, and a smile broke across her face, genuine and bright despite the dirt and dust that covered her. "We are alive," she said, as if she could not quite believe it. "We are alive," Matthias agreed, and this time he did laugh, a sound of pure joy and disbelief. A commotion nearby caught his attention. An older orc, massive and scarred, was pushing through the crowd, his eyes scanning desperately. When his gaze landed on Grasha, his entire face transformed. "Grasha!" he roared and rushed toward them. Grasha scrambled to her feet and threw herself into her father's arms. The big orc lifted her off the ground, holding her like she was a child, and Matthias heard him murmuring in the orcish language, words that sounded like prayers or thanks. When he finally set her down, Grasha turned to Matthias, who had stood up as well. "Father, this is Matthias Aldrin. He saved my life. When the collapse started, he pulled me with him. He could have left me, but he did not." The older orc turned his gaze on Matthias, and for a moment, Matthias felt a flicker of unease. The orc was intimidating, easily a head taller than Matthias and twice as broad, with tusks that were far larger and more prominent than his daughter's. But then the orc stepped forward and gripped Matthias's shoulder, his expression solemn. "I am Throgak of the Stonefist clan," he said, his voice deep and rumbling. "You have saved my daughter's life, and for that, you have my eternal gratitude. If there is ever anything I can do for you, you need only ask." Matthias felt uncomfortable with the intensity of the gratitude, but he nodded respectfully. "I am glad I could help. Grasha is very brave. She kept her head when many would have panicked." Grasha flushed at the praise, looking away. Throgak glanced between them, and something shifted in his expression, though Matthias could not read what it meant. "You have no family here?" Throgak asked. "No place to stay?" Matthias shook his head. "I have been renting a cot in the workers' barracks, but I suspect that arrangement will end now that the mine is gone." "Then you will stay with us," Throgak said, and it was not a question. "We have a small cabin in the woods, a few miles from here. It is not much, but there is room, and it is the least we can do." "I do not want to impose," Matthias began, but Throgak cut him off with a sharp gesture. "You saved my daughter. There is no imposition. Come, gather whatever belongings you have, and we will go before dark." Matthias looked at Grasha, who nodded encouragingly. "Please," she said quietly. "I would feel better knowing you had a safe place to stay, and I would like to repay you for what you did." "You do not owe me anything," Matthias said, but he knew he was fighting a losing battle. And in truth, he had nowhere else to go. The mine was his only source of income, and without it, he would need to move on soon anyway. A few days with Grasha and her father while he figured out his next move would not hurt. "All right," he said. "I will stay at least for a little while. And thank you." Throgak clapped him on the shoulder again, nearly sending him stumbling, and nodded with satisfaction. "Good. Grasha, help our guest gather his things. I will speak with the foreman about our final wages." As Throgak strode off toward the mine office, Grasha fell into step beside Matthias. They walked together toward the workers' barracks, a long, low building that housed the unmarried miners. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, and Matthias felt the adrenaline of the day's events beginning to fade, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion. "Your father is very kind," he said. Grasha nodded. "He is a good man. Hard because life has made him that way, but good. He will not forget what you did today." "Neither will I," Matthias said, and realized it was true. Something had shifted between them in those dark tunnels, a connection forged in fear and survival. He barely knew Grasha, but he felt responsible for her in a way that went beyond simple human decency. They reached the barracks, and Matthias gathered his few possessions: a change of clothes, a bedroll, a small pouch of coin, and his father's old knife. Everything fit into a single pack, the sum total of his life reduced to a bundle he could carry on his back. Grasha waited for him outside, and they walked together back to where Throgak was waiting with a small cart. The older orc had secured their wages and purchased some supplies from the company store. They loaded everything onto the cart and then set off down the road that led away from the mine. The walk to the cabin took the better part of an hour. The road gave way to a narrow trail that wound through the forest, and Matthias found himself in a landscape of tall pines and moss-covered stones. It was beautiful in a wild, untamed way, and he could understand why Throgak and Grasha had chosen to make their home here, away from the town, and the people who looked at them with fear and hatred. The cabin, when they reached it, was small but well-built, constructed of logs and fieldstone with a sturdy roof and a chimney that promised warmth. There was a small garden plot beside it, and a shed for storage. It was the kind of place Matthias had dreamed of having someday, a home of his own far from the noise and violence of the world. Inside, the cabin was simply furnished but comfortable. There was a main room with a fireplace, a table, and a few chairs. A ladder led to a sleeping loft, and a curtained alcove held a second bed. Throgak gestured to the alcove. "You will sleep there," he said. "It is not much, but it is private." "It is more than enough," Matthias said sincerely. "Thank you." Grasha set about preparing a meal while Throgak built up the fire. Matthias offered to help, and she accepted gratefully, setting him to cutting vegetables while she worked on the stew. They moved around each other in the small space with an easy coordination that surprised him, and he found himself relaxing in a way he had not in months. Over dinner, Throgak asked about Matthias's plans, and Matthias admitted he had none beyond finding work. "The mine was my only prospect in this region," he said. "I suppose I will need to move on, look for opportunities elsewhere." Throgak grunted thoughtfully. "The frontier is dangerous for a man alone. Bandits, wild beasts, worse things. You are a veteran, you said. You know how to fight." "I do," Matthias confirmed. "I am handy with a blade and decent with a bow. I can track and hunt. I did a lot of scouting during the war." "Then stay here for a time," Throgak said. "Help us with the work. There is always something that needs doing: hunting, trapping, repairing the cabin. In return, you have a place to sleep and food to eat. When you are ready to move on, you will do so with our blessing and a full pack." Matthias hesitated. The offer was generous, almost too generous, but he could see the sincerity in Throgak's face. And when he glanced at Grasha, she was looking at him with an expression he could not quite read, something hopeful and anxious at the same time. "All right," he said. "I will stay for a while, but I will pull my weight, I promise you that." Throgak smiled, a broad grin that showed his tusks. "I did not doubt it. You are a man of honor, Matthias Aldrin. I can see that." That night, Matthias lay in the small alcove bed, listening to the sounds of the cabin settling around him. Through the curtain, he could hear Throgak's deep snores from the loft and the softer sounds of Grasha moving about, banking the fire and preparing for the night. He thought about the events of the day, the terror of the collapse, the desperate scramble to survive. He thought about Grasha's arms around him, the way she had clung to him until the dust settled, and he felt something stir in his chest that he could not name. This was supposed to be temporary, he told himself. A few days, maybe a week, and then he would move on. He had no ties here, no reason to stay. But as he drifted off to sleep, he found himself hoping that maybe, just maybe, he could stay a little longer. The days that followed fell into a comfortable pattern. Matthias rose with the sun and worked alongside Throgak and Grasha, helping with the endless tasks that came with living on the frontier. They hunted deer and rabbit, tended the garden, repaired the shed roof, and chopped wood for the coming winter. It was hard work, but it was honest work, and Matthias found a satisfaction in it that he had not felt in years. Grasha was a constant presence, working beside him with tireless energy. She was strong, far stronger than he had expected, and she could lift and carry loads that would have staggered most men. But she was also patient and kind, quick to laugh at his jokes and eager to teach him about the plants and animals of the forest. They talked as they worked, sharing stories and trading knowledge. Matthias told her about his childhood in a farming village, about joining the army to escape the poverty and boredom of rural life. Grasha told him about growing up in the high-peak territories, about the clan politics and constant warfare that had driven her and Throgak away. "I have never wanted the life of a warrior," she admitted one afternoon as they picked berries at the forest's edge. "I know it is expected of orcs, that we are supposed to be fierce and bloodthirsty, but I have always preferred growing things to destroying them. Matthias popped a berry into his mouth and smiled. I understand that. I spent my whole youth wanting to be a soldier, thinking it would make me important, make my life mean something. But all I found was death and misery. If I could do it over, I would have stayed on my family's farm and learned to find meaning in simpler things. Grasha looked at him, and there was a warmth in her gaze that made his heart skip. You are a good man, Matthias. I am glad you ended up here, even if the circumstances were terrible. He felt his face heat and looked away, focusing on the berry bushes. I am glad too, he said quietly. As the weeks passed, Matthias found himself drawn to Grasha in ways that confused and alarmed him. He noticed the way her eyes crinkled when she smiled, the graceful strength of her movements, the sound of her voice when she sang while working. He found excuses to be near her, to work on tasks that would put them in close proximity, and he caught himself staring at her more often than he cared to admit. It was wrong, he told himself. She was an orc, a different species, and he was a human. Their peoples had been at war for generations, and even now, peace was fragile and prejudice ran deep. People would not understand, would not accept it. And yet, he could not seem to help himself. One evening, about a month after he had arrived, Matthias sat outside the cabin watching the sunset. Grasha came out and sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. You have been quiet today, she said. Is something troubling you? Matthias hesitated. He wanted to tell her, wanted to put words to the feelings that had been building inside him, but he did not know how. Instead, he said, I have been thinking about what comes next. I have been here a month now, and I feel like I am imposing on your hospitality. Grasha stiffened. Do you want to leave? No, Matthias said quickly, too quickly. I mean, I know I should probably move on, find work, but he stopped, frustrated with his inability to articulate what he was feeling. Grasha was silent for a long moment. Then she said very quietly, I do not want you to go. Matthias turned to look at her and found her gazing at him with an expression of such vulnerability that it took his breath away. Grasha, I know it is foolish, she said, her words coming in a rush. I know there is no future in it. You are human and I am an orc, and the world would never accept us. But I cannot help how I feel. You saved my life, and in the weeks since, you have become my closest friend. I think about you constantly, and the thought of you leaving makes me feel like my heart is being torn out. Matthias reached out without thinking and took her hand. Her skin was warm, her fingers strong but trembling slightly. I feel the same way, he admitted. I have been trying to fight it, trying to tell myself it is wrong or impossible, but Grasha, I care about you. Deeply. She looked down at their joined hands and a tear slid down her cheek. What are we going to do? I do not know, Matthias said honestly. But I know I do not want to leave. Not now, maybe not ever. If you will have me, I want to stay here with you and your father. I want to build a life here, even if the rest of the world thinks we are mad. Grasha's grip tightened on his hand. My father will support us. He likes you, respects you. But the people in the town, the other humans, let them think what they want, Matthias said fiercely. I am tired of living my life according to other people's hatred and prejudice. I want to live for myself, for you, for us. Grasha looked up at him, and the hope in her eyes was almost painful to see. Are you sure? This will not be easy, Matthias. There will be consequences. I am sure, he said, and realized as he spoke the words that he had never been more certain of anything in his life. Grasha leaned in slowly, giving him time to pull away if he wanted to. Matthias did not pull away. Their lips met in a tentative, gentle kiss, and he felt something inside him settle into place, like a puzzle piece finally finding its proper spot. When they broke apart, Grasha was smiling, her eyes shining. I love you, Matthias Aldrin. I love you too, Grasha of the Stonefist clan, Matthias said and kissed her again. They told Throgak that night. The older orc listened in silence as they explained their feelings, their intentions. When they finished, he sat back in his chair and regarded them both with an unreadable expression. I have seen this coming for weeks, he said finally. The way you look at each other, the way you move around each other. I am not blind. He paused, then sighed. I cannot say I am surprised, but I also cannot say I am without concerns. The world will not be kind to you. You will face rejection, perhaps violence. Are you prepared for that? We are, Matthias said firmly. Or at least, we are willing to face it together. Throgak looked at his daughter. Grasha, you are an adult and I trust your judgment, but I need to know, is this what you truly want? Not just gratitude for being saved, not just loneliness in a strange land, but genuine love. It is genuine, Father, Grasha said, and her voice was steady. I have thought about this endlessly, questioned my own feelings, but I keep coming back to the same truth. I love Matthias and I want to be with him. Throgak nodded slowly. Then you have my blessing. Matthias, you have proven yourself to be honorable and true. I could not ask for a better partner for my daughter. But know that if you ever hurt her, if you ever betray her, there is nowhere in this world you could hide from me. Matthias met the older orc's gaze without flinching. I understand, and I swear to you, I will spend the rest of my life making her happy. Throgak's stern expression softened into something like approval. Good. Then let us have a drink to celebrate, and then we must make plans. If you two are to be together, we must do this properly. Over the next several weeks, Matthias and Grasha's relationship deepened and blossomed. They spent their days working side by side, and their evenings sitting together by the fire, talking and laughing, and simply enjoying each other's presence. Matthias found that he had never been happier, that the simple joy of being with Grasha was more fulfilling than anything he had experienced before. But their happiness existed in a bubble, and they knew it could not last forever. Eventually, they would need to venture into town for supplies, to deal with the world beyond their small cabin in the woods. The reckoning came on a crisp autumn morning when Throgak announced they needed to go to the nearby settlement to sell furs and buy winter provisions. Matthias volunteered to go, and after some discussion, Grasha insisted on accompanying him. You should not have to face them alone, she said. We are together now, and we face things together. The town of Copperstone was a rough frontier settlement, a collection of wooden buildings clustered around a central square. As Matthias and Grasha walked down the main street, pushing a cart loaded with furs, Matthias became acutely aware of the stares and whispers that followed them. Is that the orc from the mine? Someone muttered. What is she doing with that human? Another voice said, walking around like she belongs here. Grasha kept her head high, but Matthias could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her jaw tightened. He moved closer to her, a subtle gesture of solidarity. They reached the trading post, a large building that served as general store, post office, and social hub. Inside, the proprietor, a weathered man named Carson, looked up from his counter and frowned. Help you, he said curtly. We have furs to sell, Matthias said, keeping his voice polite but firm. Good quality, properly cured. Carson looked at the furs, then at Grasha, then back at Matthias. I will give you half the usual price. Orc tanned hides are worth less. The hides were tanned by all of us, Matthias said, feeling his temper rise. And they are worth the standard price. You know it, and I know it. Carson scowled. You are defending an orc now. What are you, some kind of traitor to your own kind? I am defending fairness and honesty, Matthias said. And I am not a traitor for treating Grasha with the respect she deserves. Now, are you going to offer a fair price, or do we take our business elsewhere? Carson looked like he wanted to argue, but he also clearly did not want to lose the sale. Fine, he snapped. Standard price, but I am not happy about it. They concluded the transaction in tense silence and then purchased the supplies they needed. As they left the trading post, a group of young men blocked their path. Matthias recognized one of them from the mine, a bully named Garrett who had made his dislike of orcs well known. Well, Garrett said, his voice dripping with contempt. If it is not the orc lover, tell me, Aldrin, what is it like bedding a monster? Does she grunt and squeal like a pig? Matthias felt fury surge through him, hot and immediate. Before he could respond, Grasha put a hand on his arm. Do not, she said quietly. He is not worth it. Listen to your beast, Garrett sneered. She knows her place. Matthias shook off Grasha's hand and stepped forward, getting right in Garrett's face. Say that again, he said, his voice low and dangerous. I dare you, Garrett grinned, clearly enjoying the confrontation. What are you going to do, Aldrin? Fight me over a piece of orc trash? Matthias's fist connected with Garrett's jaw before he even realized he had thrown the punch. Garrett staggered back, stunned, and then his friends surged forward. Matthias found himself in the middle of a brawl, fists flying, bodies pressing in from all sides. He managed to land a few good hits before someone grabbed him from behind, pinning his arms. He struggled, but there were too many of them. He saw one of the men advancing on Grasha, and fear spiked through him. Grasha, run, he shouted, but Grasha did not run. Instead, she stepped forward and, with a roar that echoed down the street, grabbed the man threatening her and threw him bodily into his companions. They went down in a tangle of limbs, and Grasha turned to the man holding Matthias. Her tusks were bared, her eyes blazing, and she looked every inch the warrior her people were known to be. Let him go, she growled. Now. The man holding Matthias released him immediately, clearly intimidated. Matthias straightened, breathing hard, and moved to stand beside Grasha. They faced the group of young men who had backed off, suddenly less eager to fight. Enough, a voice barked. The town sheriff, an older man named Brennan, pushed through the crowd that had gathered to watch. What in the blazes is going on here? These two started it, Garrett said, clutching his jaw. The orc attacked me for no reason. That is a lie, Matthias said hotly. He provoked us, insulted Grasha, and I defended her honor. Sheriff Brennan looked between them, his expression weary. I do not care who started it. Fighting in the street is against the law. Garrett, you and your boys get out of here before I arrest the lot of you. Aldrin, you and the orc should leave town and do not come back unless you want more trouble. We have as much right to be here as anyone, Matthias protested. Maybe, Brennan said. But right now your presence is causing a disturbance. Go home, calm down, and think about whether you want to keep making waves in this town. Matthias wanted to argue, but he felt Grasha's hand on his arm again, gently tugging. Come on, she said. Let us go. They collected their cart and left town, and Matthias fumed the entire walk back to the cabin. When they arrived, Throgak took one look at Matthias's bruised face and Grasha's disheveled appearance and sighed. What happened? He asked. They told him, and Throgak listened with a grim expression. When they finished, he shook his head. I warned you it would be like this. People fear what they do not understand, and they hate what they fear. You cannot change them all, no matter how much you want to. So what are we supposed to do? Matthias demanded. Just accept it. Let them insult and demean Grasha without consequence. No, Throgak said. But you must choose your battles wisely. Fighting in the street accomplishes nothing except making you look like the aggressors. If you want to change minds, you must do it through your actions, by living well and proving that love between human and orc is not the abomination they think it is. Matthias slumped into a chair, the anger draining out of him, replaced by exhaustion. "I am sorry, Grasha. I should not have lost my temper." Grasha knelt beside him and took his hands in hers. "You were defending me. I could never be angry about that, but my father is right. We cannot fight the whole world. We can only live our lives and hope that someday people will see that we are no different from them." Matthias cupped her face in his hands. "I love you," he said, "and I will not let anyone make you feel less than you are." "I know," Grasha said, leaning into his touch, "and I love you too." Winter came to the frontier with a vengeance, bringing snow and bitter cold that turned the forest into a landscape of white and ice. Matthias, Grasha, and Throgak hunkered down in the cabin, venturing out only when necessary to hunt or check the traps. It was during this time that Matthias and Grasha's bond deepened further. They spent long evenings by the fire, talking about their hopes and dreams for the future. Matthias spoke of his desire to have a farm of his own someday, a place where they could grow crops and raise animals in peace. Grasha shared her dream of having children, of raising a family that would know love and acceptance rather than prejudice and fear. "You think it is possible?" she asked one night as they lay together in Matthias's alcove, the small space made cozy by their shared warmth. "For us to have a family, for our children to be accepted?" "I do not know," Matthias admitted, "but I believe we can give them a better life than either of us had. We can teach them to be strong, to be kind, to stand up for what is right, and we can love them, which is more than many children have." Grasha snuggled closer to him. "You will be a wonderful father," she murmured. "And you will be an amazing mother," Matthias replied, kissing the top of her head. As winter wore on, Matthias began to think seriously about the future. He loved Grasha with a depth that sometimes frightened him, and he wanted to make their relationship official, to bind their lives together in a way that everyone would recognize. But he was not sure how to go about it. Human marriage customs and orc bonding rituals were different, and he wanted to honor both. He sought Throgak's advice one afternoon while they were out checking the trap lines. The older orc listened as Matthias explained his desire to marry Grasha, and then nodded thoughtfully. "Among the clans, a bonding is a serious matter," Throgak said. "The couple must prove their commitment through a series of challenges and then pledge themselves before the clan elders. But we are not among the clans now, and many of the old traditions do not apply here. If you wish to bond with Grasha, you must speak with her, make your intentions clear, and then decide together what form your union will take." "I want to do this properly," Matthias said. "I want her to know that I am serious, that I am committed to her for life." Throgak clapped him on the shoulder. "Then show her. Words are easy, but actions speak louder. Prove to her every day that you love her, that you choose her above all others. That is the truest form of bonding, regardless of ceremony or ritual." Matthias took Throgak's words to heart. Over the following weeks, he looked for ways to show Grasha how much she meant to him. He carved her a beautiful wooden comb, etched with intricate designs. He surprised her with small gifts, a bundle of wildflowers he had found in a sheltered valley, a particularly fine piece of deer hide for her to work with. He helped with the tasks she found most tedious, and he made sure to tell her every day how much he loved her. As the snow began to melt and the first signs of spring appeared, Matthias decided it was time to make his proposal. He planned it carefully, choosing a spot in the forest where he and Grasha had often walked together, a clearing with a view of the mountains and a small stream that burbled cheerfully over smooth stones. He asked Grasha to walk with him one evening, and she agreed, her curiosity evident. They walked in comfortable silence until they reached the clearing, and then Matthias stopped and turned to face her. "Grasha," he said, his heart pounding, I brought you here because I wanted to ask you something important. Grasha's eyes widened. What is it? Matthias took her hands in his. I love you more than I have ever loved anyone or anything. You have brought joy and purpose to my life, and I cannot imagine a future without you. I know our peoples have been enemies, and I know the world will not make this easy for us, but I do not care. I want to spend the rest of my life with you, as your partner, your husband, your bondmate. Grasha of the Stonefist clan, will you marry me? Tears welled up in Grasha's amber eyes, and she nodded, unable to speak for a moment. When she finally found her voice, it was thick with emotion. Yes, she said. Yes, Matthias, I will marry you. I will bond with you. I will be yours, and you will be mine for as long as we both live. Matthias pulled her into a fierce embrace, and they stood there in the clearing, holding each other as the sun set behind the mountains. When they finally pulled apart, Matthias reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple ring he had fashioned from a piece of silver he had traded for in town. It was not much, but it was all he had to offer. I know this is a human tradition, he said, slipping the ring onto her finger. But I wanted you to have something to symbolize our bond. Grasha looked at the ring, then at Matthias, and her face lit up with a radiant smile. It is perfect, she whispered. You are perfect. They told Throgak that night, and the older orc's response was to pull them both into a crushing hug. I am so happy for you both, he said, his voice gruff with emotion. You have my blessing and my support always. They decided to hold a small ceremony, blending human and orc traditions. Throgak would officiate as the elder of Grasha's family, and they would exchange vows and gifts in front of the cabin, with the forest as their witness. The preparations took a few weeks. Matthias fashioned a new knife for Grasha, a traditional gift among orc warriors, even though Grasha was no warrior. He etched the blade with symbols that represented strength, love, and loyalty. Grasha, in turn, wove him a cloak from the finest wool, dyed in shades of blue and green, and embroidered with patterns that had meaning in orcish culture. On the day of the ceremony, spring was in full bloom. The forest was alive with birdsong, and the air was sweet with the scent of wildflowers. Matthias dressed in his best clothes, the new cloak around his shoulders, and stepped outside to find Grasha waiting for him. She was breathtaking. She wore a dress of soft leather, decorated with beads and feathers, and her dark hair was braided with flowers. Her small tusks gleamed in the sunlight, and her amber eyes shone with happiness. Throgak stood before them, his own formal attire making him look even more imposing than usual. He raised his hands, and his deep voice carried through the clearing. We gather today to witness the bonding of Matthias Aldrin and Grasha of the Stonefist clan. In the old traditions of my people, a bonding is a sacred commitment, a pledge to stand together against all hardships, to support and protect one another until death. In the traditions of the human lands, marriage is a union recognized by law and community, a partnership built on love and trust. Today, we honor both traditions, and we recognize that love knows no boundaries, no borders, no divisions of species or clan. Throgak looked at Matthias. Matthias, do you pledge to take Grasha as your wife and bondmate, to honor her, cherish her, and stand by her side no matter what challenges you face? I do, Matthias said, his voice steady. Throgak turned to Grasha. Grasha, do you pledge to take Matthias as your husband and bondmate, to honor him, cherish him, and stand by his side no matter what challenges you face? I do, Grasha said, her voice ringing clear. Then exchange your gifts, symbols of your commitment to one another. Matthias presented Grasha with the knife, and she accepted it with reverence, running her fingers over the etched blade. I will treasure this always, she said. Grasha gave Matthias the cloak, and he wrapped it around himself, feeling the warmth and care she had woven into every stitch. "It is beautiful," he said. "Just like you." Throgak smiled. "By the power vested in me as elder of the Stonefist clan and in recognition of the love you share, I declare you bonded, married, united as one. May your lives together be filled with joy. May your love never waver, and may the world one day see what I see, two souls meant to be together." Matthias and Grasha kissed, a long, sweet kiss that sealed their vows. When they broke apart, Throgak pulled them both into another embrace, and Matthias felt a sense of completeness he had never known before. The weeks following the ceremony were some of the happiest of Matthias's life. He and Grasha moved into the alcove together, making it their own space, and they spent their days working on the cabin and the land, planning for the future. But the outside world was not content to leave them in peace. Word of their marriage spread, carried by trappers and traders who passed through the area, and the reactions ranged from shock to outrage to disgust. The sheriff visited one day, his expression stern. "I am not here to cause trouble," Brennan said, holding up his hands. "But I need to warn you. There are people in town who are not happy about your marriage to the orc. There has been talk of running you out, maybe worse. I cannot control what everyone does, so I am advising you to be careful." Matthias felt a chill run down his spine, but he kept his voice steady. "We have done nothing wrong. We have the right to live here, to be married, to make a life together." "Maybe," Brennan said, "but rights do not mean much when an angry mob shows up at your door. Just be careful, all right." After the sheriff left, Matthias and Grasha talked long into the night about what to do. Throgak advocated for staying, for standing their ground and not letting fear drive them away. But Matthias worried about the safety of his new wife and his father-in-law. In the end, they decided to stay but to take precautions. They reinforced the cabin's door and windows, laid in extra supplies in case they needed to hole up for a while, and made sure they were never far from their weapons. The attack came a month later, in the dead of night. Matthias woke to the sound of shouting and the smell of smoke. He bolted upright, and beside him, Grasha did the same. "Fire!" she cried. They scrambled out of bed and into the main room where Throgak was already on his feet, his axe in hand. Flames were licking up the side of the cabin where someone had thrown a torch, and outside they could hear voices yelling slurs and threats. "Get water!" Matthias shouted, and Grasha ran for the buckets they kept by the door. Matthias grabbed his own axe and followed Throgak outside. A group of masked men stood in the clearing, torches in hand. Matthias recognized their builds, their voices. Garrett and his friends, along with a few others from town. "You were warned," Garrett shouted. "You were told to leave, but you did not listen. Now you pay the price." "This is our home," Matthias said, his voice hard. "We have done nothing to you. Leave now before this gets worse." "Worse," Garrett laughed. "The only thing that is going to get worse is what happens to you and your orc whore." Matthias saw red. He charged forward, axe raised, and Garrett's bravado faltered. But before he could reach the man, Grasha was there, placing herself between Matthias and the mob. "Enough!" she roared, and the power in her voice stopped everyone in their tracks. "We have done nothing to harm any of you. We live quietly, we keep to ourselves, we ask only to be left in peace. If you cannot give us that, if you must destroy and hurt because you are too small-minded to accept what you do not understand, then you are the monsters, not us." Throgak stepped up beside his daughter, his massive form radiating menace. "I fought in the war," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "I have killed many men, and I did not enjoy it, but I will do it again if you threaten my family. You have one chance to leave peacefully. Take it." The mob hesitated. Grasha's words and Throgak's threat had shaken their resolve. Matthias stood beside his wife and father-in-law, presenting a united front. "This is not over," Garrett spat, but he was backing away, and his companions followed. They disappeared into the night, leaving their torches behind. Matthias and Grasha spent the rest of the night putting out the fire and repairing the damage. The cabin had suffered, but it was still standing, and they were unhurt. Throgak stood guard, his axe at the ready in case the mob returned, but they did not. In the morning, Sheriff Brennan arrived, accompanied by several deputies. He surveyed the damage with a grim expression. "I heard what happened," he said. "I am sorry. I will do what I can to find out who was responsible and bring them to justice." "It was Garrett and his friends," Matthias said flatly. "We all know it." "Knowing and proving are two different things," Brennan said, "but I will investigate, I promise you that. In the meantime, I am posting a deputy nearby to keep an eye on things. If anyone comes around causing trouble again, we will be ready." True to his word, Brennan assigned a deputy to patrol the area around the cabin. The attacks stopped, but the hostility remained. Whenever Matthias and Grasha went to town, they were met with cold stares and muttered insults. Some people refused to serve them, and they were forced to rely on a few sympathetic traders who were willing to do business with them. Despite the hardships, Matthias and Grasha refused to be driven away. They continued to work their land, to build their life together, and to prove through their actions that their love was real and worthy of respect. Over time, their persistence began to pay off. A few of the townspeople, seeing that Matthias and Grasha were good, honest people, began to soften their attitudes. The local blacksmith started taking their custom again, and the wife of the general store owner began to greet Grasha with a smile. It was slow progress, but it was progress nonetheless. Spring turned to summer, and Grasha announced that she was pregnant. Matthias was overjoyed, and even Throgak, usually so stoic, could not hide his delight at the prospect of becoming a grandfather. The pregnancy was not easy. Grasha suffered from terrible sickness in the early months, and Matthias spent countless nights holding her hair back and rubbing her back as she retched. But as the months went on, she began to feel better, and her belly swelled with the growing life inside her. Matthias found himself consumed with worry and excitement in equal measure. He worried about the birth, about whether the baby would be healthy, about what kind of world they were bringing a child into. But he was also thrilled at the idea of being a father, of having a family with the woman he loved. As Grasha's due date approached, Matthias made preparations. He reinforced the bed, gathered supplies for the birth, and even convinced a midwife from town to agree to help, though she charged them double her usual fee. The labor began on a cool autumn evening. Matthias held Grasha's hand as the contractions came, and he felt utterly helpless in the face of her pain. Throgak paced outside, his usual calm shattered by worry for his daughter. The birth was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next morning. But finally, with a last great effort, Grasha pushed their child into the world. The midwife caught the baby and held it up, and Matthias felt his heart stop. The baby was a boy, small but healthy, with his mother's green skin and small tusks, and his father's blue eyes and fine features. He was a perfect blend of both his parents, and he was the most beautiful thing Matthias had ever seen. "A son," the midwife said, her voice filled with wonder. "You have a son." Grasha was crying, tears streaming down her face as the midwife placed the baby in her arms. Matthias knelt beside the bed, his own eyes wet, and touched his son's tiny hand. The baby's fingers curled around his, and Matthias felt a surge of love so powerful it took his breath away. "What will you name him?" Throgak asked, leaning in to see his grandson. Matthias looked at Grasha and they exchanged a smile. They had talked about names for months, unable to agree on one. But now, looking at their son, Matthias knew what felt right. Marcus, he said. Marcus Aldrin, a name that honors both our peoples. Grasha nodded. Marcus, she repeated, her voice soft. Welcome to the world, my son. The midwife cleaned up and left, shaking her head in amazement at the sight of the half-orc baby. Throgak brought them food and water, and they spent the rest of the day marveling at the new life they had created. As the weeks passed, Marcus grew and thrived. He was a curious, cheerful baby, and he captured the hearts of everyone who met him. Even some of the more hardened townspeople found it difficult to maintain their hatred when faced with the sight of a smiling infant. Matthias and Grasha settled into the rhythms of parenthood, taking turns feeding and changing Marcus, soothing him when he cried, and delighting in every little milestone. Matthias had never imagined he could feel such fierce, protective love for another person, but Marcus brought out a side of him he had not known existed. One afternoon, when Marcus was about 6 months old, Sheriff Brennan stopped by the cabin. He looked uncomfortable and Matthias immediately tensed. "What is wrong?" he asked. Brennan sighed. "Nothing is wrong exactly. I just wanted to let you know that Garrett and some of his friends left town. Seems they got into trouble with some traders, tried to rob them, and it went badly. They are wanted men now, and they fled into the wilderness." Matthias felt a weight lift from his shoulders. "So we do not have to worry about them anymore." "Not unless they come back," Brennan said, "but I doubt they will. The wilderness is a dangerous place, and they are not exactly survival experts." He paused, then added, "I also wanted to say that I am sorry for not doing more to protect you and your family. You deserved better from this town." Matthias was surprised by the apology. "Thank you, Sheriff." "That means a lot," Brennan nodded. "Your boy is a cute one. I saw him in town last week with your wife. Got my wife's attention, he did. She has been nagging me ever since to stop by and see him properly." Matthias laughed. "You are welcome anytime. Grasha would be happy to have visitors." After Brennan left, Matthias went inside and found Grasha nursing Marcus by the fire. He sat down beside her and told her about the sheriff's visit. "Things are changing," Grasha said thoughtfully. "Slowly, but they are changing. Maybe Marcus will grow up in a world that is kinder than the one we knew." "I hope so," Matthias said, reaching out to stroke Marcus's soft hair. "I hope he never has to face the hatred and fear that we did. I hope he can just be himself, loved and accepted for who he is." Grasha leaned her head on Matthias's shoulder. "We will make sure of it," she said. "We will teach him to be strong and kind, to stand up for what is right, and to never be ashamed of who he is." As the years passed, Matthias and Grasha's life continued to improve. They expanded their cabin, adding a second room for Marcus, and they began to cultivate more of the land, planting crops and raising chickens. Throgak grew older but remained active, teaching his grandson about hunting and tracking and the old stories of the orc clans. Marcus grew into a bright, energetic child, full of questions and laughter. He had his mother's strength and his father's curiosity, and he was beloved by both his parents and his grandfather. When he started venturing into town with them, Matthias and Grasha were heartened to see that most people treated him kindly, and some even stopped to chat and play with him. The attitudes toward orcs and mixed families were changing, slowly but surely. More orc families began settling in the region, and while there were still incidents of prejudice and conflict, the worst of the violence had subsided. People were beginning to see that orcs were not monsters but individuals, capable of love, hard work, and kindness just like anyone else. One evening, when Marcus was about 5 years old, Matthias and Grasha sat outside the cabin watching the sunset. Marcus was playing nearby, chasing fireflies with a stick, and Throgak was inside preparing dinner. "You ever regret it?" Grasha asked suddenly. "Marrying me?" Dealing with all the hardship and hatred, Matthias turned to look at her, shocked. "Never," he said firmly. "You and Marcus are the best things that ever happened to me. I would go through it all again 1,000 times if it meant I got to be with you." Grasha smiled, but there were tears in her eyes. "I love you, Matthias, more than words can say." "I love you too," Matthias said, taking her hand. "Always." Marcus ran over, breathless and grinning. "Papa, Mama, look." He held up a firefly cupped gently in his small hands. "I caught one." Matthias and Grasha leaned in to look at the glowing insect. "That is wonderful, Marcus," Grasha said. "But remember, we have to let it go so it can find its family." Marcus nodded solemnly and opened his hands, watching as the firefly flew off into the dusk. "Will I have brothers and sisters someday?" he asked suddenly. Matthias and Grasha exchanged a glance, and both of them smiled. "Maybe," Grasha said. "Would you like that?" "Yes," Marcus said enthusiastically. "I want lots of brothers and sisters to play with." Matthias laughed and ruffled his son's hair. "We will see what we can do," he said. True to their word, Grasha became pregnant again the following year. This time, the pregnancy was easier and Matthias was less anxious, having been through it once before. When Grasha gave birth to a daughter, they named her Mira, and she was as beautiful as her brother, with her father's fair hair and her mother's green skin. With 2 children, the cabin became even more lively. Marcus doted on his little sister, always eager to help care for her, and Mira grew up surrounded by love and laughter. Matthias and Grasha worked harder than ever to provide for their growing family, but they did so with joy, knowing that they were building something lasting and meaningful. As Marcus grew older, he began to ask questions about his heritage, about why he looked different from the other children in town, and why some people still treated his mother with suspicion. Matthias and Grasha answered his questions honestly, explaining the history of the war, the prejudice that still existed, and the importance of standing up for what was right. "You are special, Marcus," Grasha told him one day. "You are a bridge between 2 peoples, proof that love can overcome hatred. Never be ashamed of who you are." Marcus took his mother's words to heart. As he grew into a young man, he became known for his fairness and kindness, and he often stood up for those who were treated unjustly, whether they were orc or human. He was respected in the community, and many people began to see him as a symbol of hope for a better future. Mira, too, grew into a confident and compassionate young woman, unafraid to speak her mind and defend those who could not defend themselves. She inherited her mother's strength and her father's quick wit, and she was loved by all who knew her. One summer evening, when Marcus was 16 and Mira was 12, the family gathered outside for a meal. Throgak, now an old orc with gray in his hair and a slower step, sat at the head of the table, looking out at his family with pride. "I never thought I would see this," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "A family living in peace, human and orc together, children who are proud of both their heritages. You have built something extraordinary here, Matthias, Grasha. You have proven that love is stronger than hate, that hope can prevail even in the darkest times." Matthias reached out and took Grasha's hand. "We did it together," he said, "all of us, and we will keep doing it for as long as we live." Grasha squeezed his hand, her eyes shining. "For as long as we live," she echoed. They raised their cups in a toast, and Marcus and Mira joined in, their young voices blending with their parents' and grandfathers'. It was a moment of perfect happiness, a culmination of years of struggle and love and determination. As the years continued to pass, Matthias and Grasha watched their children grow and eventually start families of their own. Marcus married a kind human woman who accepted him for who he was, and they had children who carried on the legacy of unity and acceptance. Mira chose a different path, becoming a healer who traveled the frontier helping those in need, regardless of their race or background. Throgak passed away peacefully in his sleep one winter night, surrounded by his family. His funeral was attended by people from all over the region, human and orc alike, all of whom had been touched by his wisdom and kindness. Matthias and Grasha grieved deeply, but they took comfort in knowing that Throgak had lived a full and meaningful life, and that his legacy would live on through his grandchildren and great-grandchildren. As Matthias and Grasha grew older themselves, they often sat together in the evenings, watching the sunset and reflecting on the life they had built. Their cabin had been expanded several times over the years, and it was now a thriving homestead, surrounded by fields and orchards and the laughter of grandchildren. "We did it," Grasha said one evening, her voice soft. "We made it through." Matthias, his hair now silver and his face lined with age, smiled and took her hand. "We did," he agreed, "and it was worth every moment." They sat in silence, holding hands as the sun dipped below the horizon. The world had changed so much since that terrible day in the mine when Matthias had pulled Grasha free from the collapsing tunnel. But one thing had remained constant: their love for each other, a love that had survived prejudice, violence, and hardship, and had ultimately triumphed. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Matthias leaned over and kissed Grasha gently. "I love you," he said. "I love you too," Grasha replied, resting her head on his shoulder. And there, surrounded by the life they had built together, they sat in perfect contentment, knowing that their story, which had begun in darkness and fear, had ended in light and love. They had proven that even in a world divided by hatred and prejudice, love could flourish, families could thrive, and hope could prevail. Their legacy would live on through their children and grandchildren, a testament to the power of courage, compassion, and the unbreakable bond between two souls who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances. The frontier around them continued to change and grow, becoming a place where humans and orcs lived side by side, working together to build a better future. The old hatreds were fading, replaced by understanding and cooperation. And at the heart of it all was the story of Matthias and Grasha, the human and the orc who had dared to love each other when the world said it was impossible. Their story became legend in the region, told and retold to new generations as an example of what was possible when people chose love over fear. Young couples, both human and orc, looked to Matthias and Grasha as inspiration, proof that they too could overcome the obstacles in their path. As the years turned into decades, Matthias and Grasha remained together, their bond as strong as ever. When Grasha fell ill one harsh winter, Matthias nursed her with tender devotion, never leaving her side. And when she recovered, she did the same for him when age and old injuries caught up with him. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary surrounded by a vast extended family, children, grandchildren, and even great-grandchildren, a beautiful tapestry of green and fair skin, tusks and smooth jaws, amber and blue eyes. It was a celebration that lasted 3 days, with people coming from all over the frontier to honor the couple who had changed so many lives. On the final night of the celebration, as the festivities wound down and the guests began to depart, Matthias and Grasha stood together in front of their cabin, watching their family. Marcus approached them, his own children in tow. "Thank you," he said simply, "for everything." for being brave enough to love each other, for fighting for us, for showing us what is possible. Matthias embraced his son, and Grasha pulled her grandchildren close. "We just followed our hearts," Matthias said. "The rest was just refusing to give up." "That is more than enough," Marcus said with a smile. When everyone had finally left and the cabin was quiet again, Matthias and Grasha sat by the fire, much as they had on so many nights before. The flames crackled cheerfully, casting dancing shadows on the walls. "You remember the mine?" Grasha asked suddenly. "The day we met," Matthias nodded. "How could I forget? The ceiling was coming down and you were terrified, and I grabbed your hand and ran. You clung to me until the dust settled." "You saved my life that day," Grasha said, "but you did so much more than that. You gave me a future, a family, a love I never thought I would have. You changed everything." "You changed everything for me too," Matthias said. "Before I met you, I was drifting, lost, looking for something I could not name. And then there you were, and suddenly everything made sense. I found my purpose, my home, my heart, all in you." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, and then Grasha said, "If you could go back, knowing everything we would face, all the hardship and pain and struggle, would you still choose me?" Matthias did not hesitate. "Every single time," he said. "In every lifetime, in every world, I would choose you. You are my everything, Grasha." Tears slipped down Grasha's cheeks, but she was smiling. "And you are mine, Matthias, now and forever." They stayed up late into the night, talking and laughing and remembering all the moments that had brought them to this point. And when they finally went to bed, they held each other close, two souls intertwined, two hearts beating as one. The years that remained to them were peaceful. They continued to work their land, though at a slower pace, and they spent most of their time with their family. They watched their great-grandchildren grow, taught them the lessons they had learned, and passed on the values that had guided their lives: love, courage, acceptance, and the belief that people were fundamentally good, regardless of the color of their skin or the shape of their tusks. When Matthias finally passed away, it was quietly in his sleep, with Grasha's hand in his. He was 87 years old, and he had lived a full and remarkable life. His funeral was attended by hundreds of people, a testament to the impact he had made on the world. Grasha lived for 2 more years after Matthias's death. She spent her days tending the garden they had planted together, telling stories to her great-great-grandchildren, and waiting patiently for the day when she would be reunited with the love of her life. When that day finally came, she went peacefully, a smile on her face, and those who found her said it looked as though she was dreaming of something wonderful. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking their homestead, beneath a great oak tree that had been a sapling when they first married. Their graves became a place of pilgrimage, where people came to pay their respects and to remember the couple who had proven that love could conquer all. And so the story of Matthias and Grasha came to an end, but their legacy lived on. Their descendants continued to thrive, carrying forward the values of love and acceptance that had defined their lives. The frontier grew and prospered, becoming a place where humans and orcs lived as equals, working together to build a better world. In the towns and villages, people still told the story of the mine collapse, of the human who pulled the orc girl free, of how she clung to him until the dust settled, and how that moment of desperation and courage had sparked a love that changed the world. It was a story of hope, of the power of compassion and the triumph of love over hatred. And though Matthias and Grasha were gone, their love remained, woven into the very fabric of the land they had called home, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, when the world seems to be collapsing around us, we can find light, we can find hope, And we can find love if only we are brave enough to reach out and hold on until the dust settles.